Good evening. I'd like to welcome you to the meeting of the July 20th, 2021 Stillwater Planning Commission. I'll just briefly I'll call it to order, and I'll briefly explain our formats. We'll call for items on the agenda, and we'll hear staff's report first, then open a public hearing and hear from those in favor of and or opposition. Usually the applicant is the first person who presents. When you come to the podium, please clearly state your name and address for the record. After all interested parties have spoken, public hearing is closed. We'll hear closing remarks, alternatives from staff, then discussion and or motions. So the first item on the agenda is Christine Burnett, specific use permit, SUP 20-05, requesting review and approval of a specific use permit to establish a medical marijuana dispensary at property addressed as 416 South Washington Street in the T6 Transit 6 zoning district. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Commission. Ryan Harkins, Community Development. This is, again, an SUP, a specific use request for a medical marijuana dispensary. You can see the location of the subject property here in the hatch pattern on South Washington, as well as 5th, 4th, and then the adjacent north-south streets that are parallel. Again, this is the T6 area. The aerial here, again, identifies the subject property within the red polygon. There is a liquor store and tavern to the north and south immediately adjacent to the subject property. This is a street view, so you can see the bar, the tavern on one side and the liquor store, convenience store on the other. The zoning map here indicates the subject property lying in the hatch pattern within the T6 transect of the form-based code district. It's adjacent to RTM as well as RMI. There is also CS and commercial shopping and CB commercial business within the vicinity. The future land use map indicates this generally as a commercial corridor type of redevelopment area. Questions of staff before we open the public hearing?
I just, the Washington Street, the parking is quite restricted in that area. Is there adequate parking, and how is parking done in that kind of a situation where we haven't had much in the Washington area yet?
So parking like this would be parking in treated similarly in some other commercial areas like this. First come, first serve. It's kind of communal parking.
Okay.
Staff views that the applicant does have adequate parking on the street.
Okay.
As well as the surrounding streets to satisfy parking requirements.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I have kind of a germane question. Why is this SUP 20-05?
Okay. It's actually a valid question. So when staff intakes the original applications and the certificates of compliance, they assign a case number to it. In this case, the certificate of compliance was originally turned in 2020 to staff. There were a number of inspections that have to be done before the certificate of compliance is signed. Once that's done and turned into the Oklahoma Medical Marijuana Authority, there's a period of time before the license is given to the applicant. And then after that, they come in and apply for the SUP, and we go through that process. So it's just a matter of when things fall into place for each applicant and when we can get them through the approval process. Other questions of staff? All right, thank you
very much. I will now open the public hearing. As I said before, we'll have those in favor speaking first. Please give your name and address for the record. And if the applicant or the representative is here, that's normally how we start with. So please.
Good evening. My name is Christine Burnett, 416 South Washington Street, Stillwater. I'm seeking approval for this specific use in order to open a medical marijuana dispensary.
And do you live at 416 South Washington?
No, my personal address is 10522 North Rose, Glencoe.
Okay.
Still Payne County. Do you have any questions? All right.
No questions. Thank you very much. Is anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item? Please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for staff alternatives.
So as noted in the staff report, the findings that staff have issued are, one, that state law does allow medical marijuana dispensaries with a license. They have a license at this time to operate the facility at this specific location. Land Development Code allows for not only in the commercial shopping, commercial general, as well as T5 and T6 dispensaries with a specific use permit. We do feel parking is sufficient. We have not received a sign permit at this time, but signage can be provided through an appropriate permitting process. With that in mind, your alternatives are to accept the findings and recommend approval as presented. You can accept the findings and recommend approval with conditions if you feel conditions are appropriate. If you find it's not an appropriate request, you can recommend denial of the specific use permit, or if you feel additional discussion is needed, you can table the item to a date certain with that request for additional information being provided. Questions of staff about findings or alternatives? Okay.
Thank you very much.
you.
Commissioners.
I will move that we accept staff findings and advance SUP 20-05 to the council.
I'll second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend for approval the specific use permit. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 4 yes to no no's. I will note the arrival of our commissioner, Allred. Thank you. The next item on the agenda is KCR Retail LLC map amendment MA 21-08, requesting review and approval of a map amendment to rezone from commercial shopping CS to CG commercial general to allow additional uses at a property addressed as 522 North Perkins Road in the CS commercial shopping zoning district.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As noted, this is a map amendment to rezone from commercial shopping to general commercial. You can see the subject property at 522 Perkins here in the hatch pattern. You'll notice, if you're familiar, when you look at the aerial, the retail on the north and south of the proposed property for rezoning, as well as commercial at properties across the street along Perkins. You can see the street view here. This is at one time was a mobile home park. You can see the building in the front, as well as the retaining wall and the view down the hill from Perkins Road. Zoning map here shows, again, subject property inside the hatch pattern. You can see the commercial shopping zoning district, as well as the adjacent general commercial to the west and the south. Future land use map indicates the Perkins Road corridor primarily being a commercial corridor over the course of the planning period. The close-up indicates that as well. Questions of staff about the proposed map amendment at this time?
Do you have knowledge of drainage of, like, does that area flood? Just because it's so low is why
The applicant's representative here, I would let them answer that question better than I would, having done more of the drainage work.
There was a oil derrick or an oil well drilled in that area. Is that still operational in that area?
It's not something staff is aware of.
Okay.
That would be one we would defer to the applicant's
Okay.
agent as well.
That's fine. I think I
Any
don't see any
questions?
more questions,
Okay.
so thank you very much. We'll now open the public hearing. As always, your name and address for the record. We'll have those in favor or their representative begin. Thank you.
Good evening, Commissioners. Stephen Ghost with Ghost and
Associates, 113 East 8th Avenue. Here on behalf of the applicant, requesting a map amendment for this property. Ryan covered everything going from commercial shopping to commercial general to allow more proposed uses within it. We've got commercial general adjacent to the south, so we feel like it's an appropriate request. To address the drainage questions, it's outside of the floodplain, and we don't have any indication that it's flooded in the past. And the oil derrick is on the property to the north, immediately behind Staples. And it's my understanding it's been removed, and that property is now for sale. So, but any questions regarding the map amendment?
Do you have a question regarding the oil derrick and oil exploration, and you may not know, do you have any knowledge of any monitoring wells at that location?
I do not know of any.
Thank you.
Have other municipalities put in like RV parks in the middle of town like this?
Not to my knowledge, but I mean, I haven't done that research, but it was a mobile home park that we used to have a lot of mobile home parks on the west side of the railroad tracks too, decades ago. And so I think it's just one of those things that whether they haven't wanted them or nobody's had the foresight to do it. And we can talk more about the RV park when we get to the next item and why they're proposing it in this location.
Just a quick rewind to the oil derrick.
Yeah.
Is there any concern about it being a potential brownfield in that immediate location?
Nothing's been disclosed through the seller that would indicate that.
Say if it's on the adjacent property, I don't think they're going to have any knowledge on this piece of property that's adjacent to it. So
All the plants are green. And the grass is this tall, so the soil's not sterile. Poison ivy's healthy. So. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record.
John Bartley, here on behalf of the applicant also. My address is 623 South Lewis, Stillwater, Oklahoma, 74074, and I'm available for any questions. Thank you.
Oh, all right. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
So as noted in the staff report, staff feels the Land Development Code, as we've noted with other map amendments, this process is the process noted in the LDC for rezoning. We also note and find that the proposed general commercial zoning district, since it's immediately on two sides, is just an extension of that district and not a case of spot zoning. We don't feel the proposed map amendment would impede or negatively impact surrounding commercial uses. And we feel it's in compliance with the comprehensive plan because of the, as we noted earlier in our previous presentation, the future land use element of the plan calls for commercial along the Perkins Road corridor. With that in mind, your alternatives are to accept findings and recommend approval as presented. You can find the request is not appropriate and recommend denial. If you feel additional discussion is needed on this item, you can table the item to a date certain. Questions of staff? Okay.
I do not see any. Thank you very much. Commissioners.
I'll just say, and Commissioner Bobo, you alluded to this just a moment ago. This is what's now kind of the heart of a central, kind of a business district, if you will, a main thoroughfare for Stillwater. Back when the mobile home park was established, it was pretty much on a fringe of the community, and there was agricultural around it, and just kind of out in the middle of nowhere, frankly. Gravel roads were adjacent. So it's kind of, the town has grown up around it. I can see some advantage to having, because we know what's coming next. What's coming next is an ask for an RV park in this location, and I can see how it would be a readily made for that use. But just kind of looking at, for me, kind of looking at some of the other uses that could open up for commercial general by right. And some of the things that kind of give me a little bit of pause would be vehicle and equipment sales. I think that's the one that just kind of stands out to me, as well as the RV park. I think that's under recreation, perhaps. It just kind of makes me wonder if that's really the right development that we want to see for Stillwater on that corridor.
So there's a concern with potential use in a primary commercial corridor then.
Right.
Yeah, I think that could be a risk.
Commercial shopping versus the commercial general, which is why there's the difference between the two, and on this commercial thoroughfare. Question for my fellow commissioners. Thoughts?
No, I certainly have the same concerns. I guess, like, can I ask our attorney, is there a way that we can not change the zoning, but have the applicant get an exception or to allow for recreation under commercial shopping? Is that an option?
So you're asking for them to stay commercial shopping but allow this use? Is that
Correct.
the question?
That's right. Their particular specific use they want, just because of the opening up of, if this fails and in the future we could have a.
The commercial shopping would not allow that
Okay.
use. Yeah. I hope I understood your question correctly.
I think well.
Explanation to the question. The only way to do that would be to do a text amendment to allow that specific use in that zoning district, either as a permitted use or with an SUP.
Okay.
I mean, I think that, I understand your concerns. I think the property is kind of a particular odd one because of the drop, the narrowness, and down into the swale down behind. And so I think that if it were, it's not, but let's say if it were a paved parking lot there, equal to the cityscape, so to speak, I would have much more concerns than this rather, lost or forlorn piece of property sort of tucked in between the Staples and the loan. I think it's a loan place. It may be a, pawn shop kind of a thing. So in that regard, I'm less concerned there.
Right. Well, and to your point there, parking lot and garages are allowed by right in commercial general.
Yeah.
So that's it's possible if we were to approve a commercial general, or if we were to recommend approval to the city commission, that's what could happen.
Could be used for some other,
Sure.
some other purpose.
Some of the other purposes, right.
So I'm less concerned, although I recognize it, and obviously given the travel along Perkins, we know the craziness of Perkins Road. None of us here is unsurprised by the busyness of it, but given its sort of pocketness, I'm less concerned.
Well, and I think you bring up a good point there. If you're looking at recreational vehicle parking, you're going to be having recreational vehicles who are either large vehicles coming in and maneuvering on a very busy street, or trailers maneuvering in on a very busy street. I think it'd be safe to say the thought would be that this would be probably a game day when town's full of people, when that would be happening and occurring. A lot of that happens Friday. A lot of folks come in on Friday, even Thursday evening. And then leave on Sunday. So just some other thoughts, considerations.
And what concerns me is that if somebody comes in one of those large vehicles, they're probably not going to be leaving in the vehicle to go to the restaurants across the street, for example. And so there'll be a lot more pedestrian traffic across Perkins on days when we have increased traffic. And so there might be public safety issues.
That's true. That's a good point.
So then the question would be in terms of the zoning request, the change in zoning, not the particular use in this regard, which is not here.
Right, just
We have
the
to just
zoning.
see, what the feelings of the commission are on that.
I think some of the same concerns could be true for, parking lots and garages that are on here. The traffic, the additional traffic onto Perkins Road.
Or bed and breakfast and hotel motel.
Yeah, bed and breakfast, hotel, motel, or both. It would be, as I read this, and staff may correct me if I read this off incorrectly, it would be arts and entertainment, churches and religious institutions, healthcare and social assistance, the parking lots and garages, recreation, transportation activities, utilities, vehicle and equipment sales and service, and wholesale trade.
Right. What I meant is I would have the same concerns with
Sure,
a bed and
got
breakfast,
you.
hotel, motel
Got
going
you.
in there.
Yep.
Because of increased traffic and increased foot traffic and.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
But I agree that I don't know what else type of business would go into that space.
Yeah, the configuration of the lot is rather unusual, yeah.
And I think development of it, you would probably see something that may be similar to the Brahms next door. That was built up with the retaining wall.
So then the two primary concerns are potential compatibility with the commercial corridor and traffic impact.
Yes, both vehicular and pedestrian. Yes. So I'll step out and make a motion here. We'll see
Okay.
if it gets a second or
Yeah.
not.
Okay.
I would move to find that the map amendment is not an appropriate use for the property based on the impact to the surrounding vicinity, and do not approve, City Council approve the map amendment.
I'll second that.
Okay. It's been moved and seconded that we do not, that we reject the request to change the zoning and do not recommend to City Council for approval.
Correct.
Correct?
Yes, correct.
Yes. We will now vote. And everybody, we know what we're voting for, right? Okay, good.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Rickleman?
No.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
No.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 3 yes to 2 noes. So this mass amendment was rejected. The next item on the agenda, we'll go forward with it, I guess. We can still say. The next item on the agenda, KCR Retail LLC specific use permit SUP 21-17, requesting review and approval of a specific use permit to allow an RV park at property addressed as 522 North Perkins Road in a proposed CG Commercial General Zoning District. Harkins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Members of the Commission, this is a SUP request, again at 522 North Perkins. You can see the subject property again within the black hatch pattern, as well as how it fronts onto Perkins. On the aerial, you can see the site as it sits now within that red polygon. You can see commercial uses to the south as well as to the north, and then across Perkins Road to the east. You can see railroad tracks to the west, and then Boomer Creek. This is the street view. This was, as we discussed, one time a mobile home park. You can see the building at the front that had commercial businesses in it, as well as probably office for the mobile home park. Zoning map indicates the CS zoning district. This was an SUP that was part of a larger request to rezone to CG so that the RV park could be allowed as a specific use, or with a specific use permit, I should say, in the commercial general zoning district. Future land use element of the comprehensive plan calls for commercial uses along the Perkins Road corridor. This close-up further identifies that area. This is a rough idea of the proposed layout of the RV park provided by the applicant and their agent. You can see the access off Perkins Road. You can see where Brahms and Staples sit. You can see the units essentially would pull in and then be able to circle at the end of the property and come back out, as well as park. It gives you more of a street level type of view, as well as a close-up of the turnaround area, including a proposed dog park as an amenity. Questions of staff?
Well, it's CS zoning.
Currently it is CS. They have asked for a rezoning to CG. That both of these items would still go before the city council.
Okay.
So you still are being asked to give a recommendation on the specific use permit to council.
I see. Okay, thank you. Any
Other
other
questions of
for
staff?
staff? All right, thank you very much. I will now open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor, please step forward, give your name and address for the record, and the agent thereof.
Good evening again, Commissioners. Stephen Gose with Gose & Associates, 113 East 8th. Here on behalf of the applicant, this SUP is to allow an RV park within a commercial general district. So what, if we can, Ryan, how do I get this back up? I just hit. So we'll just go to the overview. To briefly explain, there are currently 30 mobile home pads out there. We're proposing 47 RV spaces. The driveway in the building on Perkins Road would remain where they're at. The building would be broken out into 3 sections. A storm shelter, the lower level, the walkout piece, would be a storm shelter. Half of it would be a caretaker unit for on-site management, full-time on-site management. And the top floor would be like a small laundry, hangout area, showers for the residents. It's intended to be more of a longer-term RV park, not an overnight turnover. You guys alluded to earlier, game day. I mean, there's based on discussions the developers had with OSU, there's a demand for more RV parking. It's an odd piece of property. It's 880 feet long, 170 feet wide. There's a 1 foot platted spike strip between it and Brahms, so you can't extend something on Brahms to the north. There's a lot of fall from the front to the back, making it a very odd, expensive piece of property to develop as commercial use. So what drew the developer's attention to this is you look at an aerial and you're within walking distance to all the athletic facilities, or the majority of them, to campus. So this is, in their opinion, a great use for this, because you can come here, you can stay more than one night, unlike the RV parks on campus. You can walk to football games, basketball games. You can walk to Brahms, Chick-fil-A, Raising Cane's. I personally, as a citizen, don't think we should be discouraging pedestrian traffic. We could put them all in cars and put them out on the road, or they can walk down the street and use a crosswalk. Those are very heavily used crosswalks. I drive through both of those intersections every day, and there's a lot of people that use them. So this area is used to seeing pedestrians. The utilities are available at the site. There's sewer on the west end. There's water on the east end. We got a nice 4-lane road. To address the traffic, I looked at the ITE standards and how you would do a trip generation for this, and really a longer term RV park isn't in there. But if this was single family homes, 47, which you would never get 47 single family homes, That would, at this density, that's 48 peak hour trips. If you go to apartments, it's 29 peak hour trips. A hotel is 28. So if we treat this as more of a hotel, flat apartment complex, that's 28 peak hour trips. If we're going to then back that out to a restaurant, you know, how big of a restaurant could you put on that? It's a 2,600 square foot restaurant, a high turnover sit down restaurant, or a 1,500 square foot fast food with a drive through, which Del Taco that just went in is 2,500 square feet. So trying to find, you know, if we're just going to put the traffic in perspective, we're talking a very small restaurant is all that would be a similar use. So that's the overall view of what they're trying to do. The road coming in would remain where it's at. We'd seal coat it at the west end. We'd take out the small turnaround that's in there, put in a large concrete turnaround that would allow these vehicles to turn around. The pads would be an engineered gravel section similar to what's allowed in Westwood and have been approved in other places for not parking lots that aren't highly used. It'd be compacted subgrade fabric and a gravel to provide that nice base, not paved, so it allows some more stormwater control. We'd install a wood fence on the north and the west, metal fence on the south to allow kind of that view into the park through the buildings off of Hall of Fame and out of the park in, and there would be a gate on the east end to help just secure the property. But again, these aren't somebody just driving down Perkins Road, you know, at 10 o'clock at night and decide I'm going to go to the RV park. They're really focused. The rent base and the use is going to be for that higher end user, somebody who has a nice RV and wants a place to kind of have a base camp. So that's what I've got. And I think based on your guys' discussions, I think Mr. Bartley's got some things to say, and then we can answer any questions at the end of the public hearing.
John Bartley here on behalf of the applicant, 623 South Lewis, Stillwater, Oklahoma 74074. What I really want to talk about, really twofold. One is, and we've hit on it a couple of times, but I really want you to really pay attention to the property itself, this piece of dirt. And this piece of dirt, not only in its current use or lack thereof, and its recent historical use, kind of proves to us that we've had growth all around this area, but not here. And so we result in this orphaned tract that does drop off. If there was likely to be retail or likely to be the type of commercial use that could occur in the current zoning, it probably already would have happened with the growth of this area. So we're sitting here looking at a piece of property that has been orphaned, that does have this potential use to it that will benefit not only the businesses around it currently, but the overall growth of the area. This type of improvement not only gets rid of what, let's be honest, is at best an eyesore and leading towards worse uses and impacts currently to a much upgraded use. It's going to increase the property value and taxes not only of this property, but has the potential to do the same of surrounding properties. The second thing I want us to look at is how it also will impact and benefit the other problems with this property. To the west, we do have train tracks in the creek, with the proposed use of these pads being the engineered gravel pads to allow more drainage or better drainage, not an impervious concrete surface, where they're addressing the potential of the drainage on that area. I think it also ties in greatly with the proposed plans that the city has with the bikes and trails, and it's yet another stop along that route, another access point that can use those type of things. So I think if the SUP is granted, obviously based upon needing the underlying zoning to be granted. This type of use really is quite possibly the only type of use that is reasonable or could be expected for this very specific piece of dirt. Now, I'm not going to say that very often because in my line of work, every piece of dirt is unique. But some are more unique than others. And this one, I'm hard-pressed to come up with a likelihood of there being any changes to the current use of this property, except for the one that's being proposed with this SUP. So, is it the perfect use of property in the ideal world in this spot? Well, maybe not, but we don't live in that perfect world. And we're left with this piece of property in its current condition with a very viable use that will benefit many folks along that way and the university around the corner. I had a real interesting experience about a month ago, and I was in Gulf Shores, Alabama, and I'm driving down the main drag in Gulf Shores, very heavily trafficked road, and all of a sudden I see a big sign that says RV park, and I glance, and it is full of high-end RVs, and the first thing I thought of were my clients and the use there on the main drag providing that resource right in the middle of a heavily trafficked area. Sounded very familiar to some of the concerns. I think the pedestrian concern is a legitimate question. It needs to be taken into account. But I agree with Mr. Ghost's response of it's already a heavily pedestrian trafficked area anyway. And so I really like you to look at the uniquenesses of this piece of property with this concept for it and the improvements to it as you proceed with your discussions. Any questions for me?
You mentioned property values.
Yes.
Where other municipalities have done this, like you mentioned Gulf Shores, has it had an impact on the property values? Like, do you have data?
I don't have data specific to that, but the data is readily available where you take a vacant, misused piece of property and improve it and see the property value increase, not only for that piece of property, but the property taxes with it. But I don't have specific data for RV parks in trafficked areas, no.
Mayor, question, do you know how long this piece of property has been in its current condition? How long it's been vacant when all those mobile homes have moved out? Or just did he?
I don't off the top, but for as long as I can remember is probably as accurate an answer as I could give you. I mean, the Hall of Fame was cut through in late, mid-'80s, and they started removing the mobile home parks then, and this one I would be willing to bet at least, I'd be guessing, but it's been a long time since it's been an active site. Built in 60? Built in 1960.
So some things that you may be able to address logistically, you may not know the answer to these questions.
Mm-hmm.
Conceptually, do they plan on doing the landscaping, keeping up with the landscaping for people who are renting there? Yes, I see nodding. Okay.
In the common areas, yes, it'd be on-site maintenance through the common areas, and then obviously taking care of the pads when people come and go. And I was told not to say this, but I'm going to say it anyway. There's a toy fire hydrant in the dog park with a university-specific logo. Sorry, maintenance, yes, it will be maintained landscaping-wise.
I will ask one question, just clarification. You did state that the anticipation is that there would be longer term stays, longer than a weekend. So what time frame are you thinking when you refer to a longer term stay than say, a football weekend?
Yeah, we can ask the applicant, that I don't know off the top. I'm sure it would vary.
Yeah, I'm just asking because that is what you said.
Yeah, we're,
Come up here.
Sure.
No, it's predominantly.
Just your name and your address for the
Sorry,
record. if you're gonna
Kevin Carter, 104 College View Drive, Bryan,
Thank you.
Texas, 77801. The premise behind this park, this is a game day park, effectively. So we're not looking to operate this as a live-in RV park. There's 47 spaces. It's not a 200-space park. We're not looking for traffic in and out. We're looking for, alumni that are coming in for football games, special events, come see grandkids, kids, that sort of thing. Like Mr. Bartley mentioned, there would be on-site maintenance, management, landscaping, that sort of thing. We're not looking to deter from the area around it. In fact, how I landed on this site specifically, I was looking for a retail pad in Stillwater, saw this site, and saw this as a potential converted use. The way we see it, this property would effectively operate as a hospitality property. It, in our opinion, has very little value to reclaim as a retail tract. Very little. Yeah, this is predominantly a game day property. We're trying to target 47 OSU alum.
Can I ask a couple other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
You mentioned you're from Bryan,
I am.
Texas, so
Don't get angry.
home of the Aggies, absolutely. Do you have similar properties
We
that
do.
you're involved with or that you're aware of in that particular
Yes, in
college
fact,
town?
we recently purchased and sold a tract in College Station close to the university. It was an existing, I believe, 63-unit park at the intersection of Welborn Road and Farm to Market 2818. Immediately next door, a group purchased and built a 470-unit apartment complex. Aspen Heights was the developer. I think the tract traded for about $8.10 a foot. It was not a deterrent whatsoever.
And is it located on a main thoroughfare like a
I would say the intersection of 40,000 cars and I would say 36 to 38,000 cars. So an intersection count approaching 80,000.
Okay. That was what I had. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. And anyone else wishing to speak in favor, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward, give your name and address for the record. Seeing none, I'll close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
As proposed, the Land Development Code does allow for RVs, parks in the general commercial zoning district with a specific use permit. And the SUP is not only address specific, it is use specific. So it is just for an RV park, just at this address. Property is currently vacant, as you've discussed. There are examples that the applicant can point to of a similar use in other places along similar heavy trafficked streets. So your alternatives, you can accept the findings and recommend that City Council approve the specific use permit as presented. You can accept the findings and recommend Council approve the SUP with conditions necessary for mitigating issues with adjacent properties or traffic or other things that you feel are pertinent. You can find the specific use permit is not an appropriate use based upon impacts and recommend denial by the City Council. But if you feel additional discussion is needed, you can table the item to a date certain and requesting that additional information. Questions of staff at this time?
I have one question for staff. There's been some discussion about pedestrian use along Perkins Road. Could you refresh our memories and let us know what type of sidewalk would front on Perkins Road on this piece of property? Is it our city standard of sidewalk along a thoroughfare like that?
6.
It's a 6 foot?
Yeah.
Our standard would be, would our standard be 6 or 10? 6 foot standard?
For a
Okay.
commercial property.
Great, thank you.
All right. Commissioners.
I mean, I'm going to be the first to say that I absolutely want Stillwater to be a walkable city. I'm fully on board with that. I don't know that I think encouraging foot traffic on state highways is a great idea, though. So that's kind of where I would just draw that distinction. With that said, if we're going to do anything with this property, I suppose that this is not a terrible use for it, right? I mean, as we're told that it's maybe the best bad option for this particular piece of property.
So the property is very long and narrow. And it's always possible that someone could subdivide it. Someone who abuts it, they could subdivide it. Someone who abuts it could acquire a portion of it and extend another use that's accessible from another direction. That's always possible. And there's quite a bit of fall across it. And I am aware of other commercial developments in town that have had that kind of fall. And it's very costly to develop.
I personally think this is an incredibly creative an incredibly creative way to make use of this property that the former mayor of this very town doesn't even recall when it was last used. It currently just sits. Sure, it could be subdivided at some point. I think somebody might have come up with that idea by now. There are only 47 plots in it. So even if all 47 plots were occupied at the exact same time, I don't believe that everybody in each 47 vehicle are going to be coming and going foot traffic wise all at once. Even on a game day that kicks off at X time, they're going to be leaving a little bit earlier, a little bit later. Nobody's running out in the street at the same time. So although your concerns, in my opinion, are very valid, I think this is a remarkable use for this, and hats off to the developer for wanting to create a unique spot for a very unique piece of property that is almost useless at this point. So just my opinion.
I'll just say I still have concerns about having large recreational vehicles entering and exiting Perkins Road in this location. Just exacerbates the traffic situation on that road, particularly on weekends. And if it is truly intended to be a game day type event or heavy usage for those times, so.
Staff, can I have a question, please? And educate me here. Is a special use permit compatible in a CS zoning district for this type of use?
This specific use is not compatible in the CS zoning district. It is compatible in the general commercial zoning district.
Correct.
So if you were to approve this SUP, the map amendment and the SUP would both go, regarding this property, would still go to City Council. If the Planning Commission chose to reconsider their previous vote, that would be an item they would have to take up.
Okay, thank you.
Motion, do we have anything that someone wants to lay out for the commissioners?
Seeing no other comment, without objection, I move to approve.
I'll second. It has been moved and seconded that we accept the special use permit, SUP 21-17. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Can I have a question, point of order? Is the chair allowed to second?
Yes, he is.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
No.
Mr. Shanahan?
No.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
No.
The motion fails 3 no to 2 yes. We have another motion, or do we have some other discussion?
So, I'm sorry. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, so discussion. The CG, if the CG had passed, which I would not change my vote, my vote would still stand.
Right.
But just kind of trying to brainstorm here with the rest of the commissioners to kind of talk through some things. If the CG had passed, then this would still be an SUP on Perkins Road. And so I still would not think it's a good SUP for a CG simply because of the additional traffic, the large vehicles on the already very busy road. So that would be one thought there. Perhaps if the development had something that would allow for better on-off to the highway. I don't know if the frontage allows that, to allow a little bit better maneuvering of large vehicles, if that was a thought. So I don't know if that would be something that could be additional information to ask to table this for additional information regarding how vehicles could go off and on of Perkins Road in a safe manner. That would be something that I might consider. I think the other option would just be to, given the last two votes, it looks like this would not be in favor, period. So that would be the other thing we could move towards.
One of the hardest things for me always to do is to change zoning districts. And so the fact that this is contingent on that is one of the things that's making this so difficult for me.
I feel the same way. Okay, well, I'll throw a motion out. We'll see what happens. I move that I move to reject the application based on the specific use permit is not an appropriate use for the property based on the impacts to the surrounding vicinity, primarily the traffic consideration of large vehicles coming and going onto the state highway, and do not recommend approval by City Council.
I will second that motion.
It has been moved and seconded that we reject the specific use permit 21-17 and do not recommend approval to City Council. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
No.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
No.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion to reject passes 3 yes to 2 no's. The next item on the agenda, plans, policies, and ordinances for public hearing, discussion, and possible action. Text amendment TXT 21-01 to Chapter 23, Land Development Code, Article 16, Subdivision Preparation and Requirements, Division 2, Major Subdivisions, Section 23-325, Preliminary Plat. Staff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is a proposed text amendment being brought to you tonight after discussion between staff and members of the development community, and then additional discussion within members of the development community that came back to staff. Currently, the purpose of the text amendment is to provide a place within code that would allow for a requirement of the traffic impact analysis and the section of code that would be inserted into, which would be at the stage of a preliminary plat. Currently, city standards, as far as engineering standards, require a traffic impact analysis to be done either at or the top before a final plat is submitted to the city. There is different interpretations and need for at times for clarification of the timing of that and the scope of it. However, in the last 2 years specifically, we've had 3 developments that have been submitted to the city with the traffic impact analysis being done at different times. And so members of the local development community approached staff about, is there a way to clarify this for everyone's sake going forward? There was discussion about how that could be done, and we had individuals that proposed the typical traffic engineering standard, which is what is proposed in the text amendment. That standard being more than 1,000 vehicle trip ends during a single day for development, or more than 100 vehicle trip ends during a single hour. So to give you an idea, a typical single family home would generate 2.5 typical trips per day. In some cases, depending on the size of the home and things like that. And then the Institute for Traffic Engineers does a varying scale of trip generation based on what type of development. Having said that, members of the development community and staff talked about this in the builders' monthly meeting. They were very comfortable with it. So staff is bringing it to you tonight as a proposed text amendment to code. Questions that we can answer?
Thank you very much. I will now open the public hearing. Those wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward and present your name and address for the record.
Good evening again. Stephen Gose, Gose & Associates, 113 East 8th Avenue. Here on behalf of the Builders Relation Committee, myself, another engineering firm in town, we felt there's been some inconsistencies in the application of the requirements of traffic impact analyses, depending on what part of town you're in, what neighbors are upset that day, and so forth. So, like Ryan said, the TIA is required in the standards, but it doesn't say when it's required. It's just buried in there. And so staff wasn't applying it as, well, it needs to be provided at final plat. Well, in my opinion, the preliminary plat is a planning document. The TIA is a planning document. So they need to be done together, because staff felt like they were backed in a corner. Look, we've got this approved preliminary plat approved by this body. And then we got this TIA that says we need to make these improvements, but those change this document, and we're not going to make the developer come back, which just seems inconsistent on everybody's part. So we propose, well, let's just put it in there in black and white in the code under the preliminary plat requirements, and just make it clear that it's necessary in those certain conditions. And it's the same standard most communities use, the 1,000 trips a day, the 100 peak hour trips, which you get over 100 houses because it's 1.01 peak hour trips per house in the peak hour. So 100 houses or more, you need it. So that's why we're asking it to be put in here, just so one, we know when it has to be done, not only on the size of the development, but at the time in the process, and that we're not backing anybody into a corner at final plat stage trying to have to make changes that are materially affect the preliminary plat. So, thank you.
Do you have a question?
I do have a
Harry,
question.
We have a question for
Yeah.
you. Sorry, sir.
I'll start with, when you're here long enough, you see things go full circle.
Yeah.
I know that in the past, there was quite a bit of, and I'm saying this is like my previous stint here on the Planning Commission, which was 15 to 18 years ago. We looked at having, there was quite a bit of information that was required up front, and it was so much so that a potential developer was investing an awful lot of money in the front end, not
Right.
knowing what was going to happen. What you're asking for, my sense is that a traffic study is not an incredibly expensive investment for a developer.
They're expensive. But so is coming-
if you're
yeah.
comparing to perhaps maybe a full-blown drainage study or something like that, as far as engineering time, would it, do you foresee a pushback from developers not wanting to make that investment?
I mean, they're $7,000 to $10,000 investments.
Okay.
But we also have issues. Let's take Skyline East, for example. We came in with a preliminary plat that met the code requirements.
Mm-hmm.
You as a body required a preliminary plat, even though code didn't require it. So we went and did it. The findings of it didn't really matter anyways. The neighbors wanted X, so they got X. But then at the same meeting or shortly after, you go out to 26th and Western in a development that's 3 or 4 times the size, with horrible sight distances, little skinny roads, only accessing section line roads that are 20 feet wide. And there's no mention of a traffic study, no concern by this body or the neighbors of that. And then engineering, their TIA asked for a roundabout at 26 and Western that they're not going to pay for and they're not going to dedicate land for. That just, it doesn't seem equitable across the city and how we apply the rules. And so it's part of the risk of proposing a development. But us coming back to 3 or 4 meetings because we get tabled every time because the neighbors want something, that costs a lot of money too. So I think at the end of the day, you may end up spending the same amount of money, but at least you've got some planning documents and some discussion to have.
Okay. Thank you. That helps.
Let me be clear, the TIA is ultimately required.
Yeah.
So this is just putting the cost up front rather than putting it like further into the process. Is that accurate?
Yes.
Okay.
Because right now it's not clear when it's required. It just says if your trip's over this, you have to do a TIA. But it doesn't say when. Do you do it with the first phase of your final plat or the last phase, or once you trip that threshold in your overall development? And by then it could be too late. Do you need a turn lane that now requires all these lots to be reconfigured, but they were in phase 1 of the plat, and so you can't give a turn lane or additional right-of-way? So, all right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else wishing to speak in favor of the item, please step forward. Seeing none, anyone wishing to speak in opposition to the item, please step forward. Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and ask for staff's alternatives.
Thank you. As noted in the discussion, currently the traffic impact analysis is only mentioned as a requirement in city engineering standards. We feel the text amendment would help clarify when it's required, at what stage in the development process, as well as provide a standard of when that requirement would be necessary or need to be met. With that in mind, your alternatives are to accept findings and recommend council approve the proposed text amendment. You can find that additional information is needed and table the item to a future planning commission meeting, or you can find the text amendment is not needed and do not recommend approval to council at this time. Questions about this proposed text amendment? All right, thank you.
Thank you very much. Commissioners.
I think this would be a great improvement to having consistency for developers, and design professionals are able to counsel their clients a little bit better and knowing what to expect to go in. And perhaps things could run a little smoother if it were to go this way. So I would definitely be in favor of approving the text amendment.
Yeah, I agree. It really rationalizes the process. It helps the developer, I think, do a little better, allows for better planning. And there was a good point about the inconsistencies when one is required or not. I think the West 26 definitely should have had a traffic impact analysis. So I'm in favor of this. The concern I have, and it's not addressed by this and probably will never be addressed, but is the timing when that traffic impact analysis is done, not in terms of the process, preliminary, final plat process, but when the actual traffic impact analysis is done. Because if I remember right, there are some questions about the Skyline East, whether or not a particular day was chosen when it might have had a minimal amount of traffic. Now, how subjective that is or not, I don't know, but I think that was a concern. But I don't think that can be baked into this particular change in the process. But it is a concern of mine.
Yeah, well, go ahead. Well, I was just thinking that, yes, I mean, the question of what is a traffic study, legitimate traffic study or not, but at least if we have this information in front of us at the preliminary platting, we can discuss these issues about what we think, as opposed to us having approved preliminary plats of situations. Now we come back with a traffic study of some sort, and now what do we do? Now we're in this sort of discussion process, so we're looking at things again, whereas if we'd had it all up front, perhaps we can evaluate the platting, so to speak, as a whole, and which allows us the greater opportunity, hopefully, to come up to at least, do we like, is this the thing we want to do or not do, and kind of a thing. So by requiring up front, rather than letting it occur later, at least we can have that disagreement about the platting early enough in the process that perhaps something could be done about it, as opposed to this sort of quandary of where are we now with this and now what do we do kind of a situation. So,
and in my head, I kind of always imagine that we're being marketed to, and so the information we're being presented is being presented in the best possible light. So that's how I'm accepting this information. And so if we get a TIA and it's possible that I would just assume they did it on the best possible day, and that's what when I'm looking at the information, that's already in my head.
So it doesn't affect us.
Right.
Can I address something as a licensed engineer? Real quick.
I will let you come and make a comment.
Okay, just so you all know, the process as it stands, I mean, the Institute of Transportation Engineers has standards. So they're not counting at 11 o'clock on a Saturday night. You usually count not on Mondays, not on Fridays, because people take those off. You count during the school year. You don't count in June. And in Stillwater and most communities, prior to the engineer doing the traffic study, we have a meeting, and we don't do traffic studies. Ghost and Associates doesn't. We hire the traffic professionals. But they have a meeting with city engineering staff to say, this is the development. These are the intersections we're going to look at. These are the days we're going to count. And so to address this rose-colored glasses, there are standards within the engineering community of when you do counts, how you do counts, where you do counts. And all of this is discussed with city staff before the counts and the study are done. And then hopefully before you all get it, city engineering has had a time to review and comment on that traffic study. So.
Do we have a motion or any more comments?
I'll move that we accept staff's finding and move TXT 21-1 for council approval.
Second.
It has been moved and seconded that we accept staff findings and recommend approval for the text amendment TXT 21-01. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickleman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Allred?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 5 yes to no no's. The next item on the agenda, miscellaneous items from staff, commissioners, or city attorney for discussion and possible action. We have a motion to adjourn.
So move.
Seconded.
It has been moved and seconded that we adjourn. We will now vote.
Mr. Rickelman?
Yes.
Mrs. Phillips?
Yes.
Mr. Shanahan?
Yes.
Mr. Arnold?
Yes.
Mr. Bobo?
Yes.
The motion passes 5 yes to no no's. Our next commission meeting will be on August 3rd. Thank you very much. We are adjourned.